Everything began one night when I placed an order. It was shortly after midnight, and I was tiredly scrolling through deals on a popular online platform. I was looking for a new phone, one of those models that social media proclaimed to be the best. Eventually, I found an offer that was almost too good to be true. Without much thought, I clicked on order and waited eagerly for the shipping confirmation. The next day, I received an email, but it wasn't an ordinary order confirmation. Instead, it said, "Your order is being prepared. Thank you for choosing us." At the bottom of the email, there was a link that supposedly would lead me to the details of my order. Out of curiosity, I clicked on it, but instead of the usual order summary, a dark web page opened with a simple text field that read, "Are you sure you want to place this order?" A strange error, I thought, and I closed the page. But when I went back to my order overview, my order had disappeared, no trace of the phone purchase, neither in my profile nor in my inbox. I felt uneasy but tried not to worry. Maybe the system just had a glitch. The next day, I received another email. This time, the subject line was, "Reminder, your order is waiting for you." I opened the message and read that I had to pick up my order at one of the shipping centers. That seemed odd, because I had ordered home delivery. Even so, I clicked on the pickup location and a map opened. To my surprise, the center was just a few streets away in an abandoned warehouse that I had always thought was a decommissioned factory building. After some hesitation, I decided to visit the building in the evening. It was a rainy evening, and the streets were empty. The building itself was run down, its windows opaque, and the plaster peeling in many places. But there was indeed a small, inconspicuous sign on the door with the name of the online company. I stepped inside hesitantly. It was surprisingly bright. Insidenian lights illuminated the large space, and in the middle stood a desk with a computer, the only piece of furniture in the room. No employee was in sight. I approached the desk, and the computer screen flickered on. A text field appeared with the message, "Please enter your order number." I had saved the order number on my phone, so I entered it. The computer processed the input, and after a while, another line of text appeared. "Please proceed to room 13. Your order awaits you there." A cold feeling crept down my spine, but I forced myself to continue. On a far wall, I saw a row of doors, each marked with a number. Room 13 was at the end of the corridor, in a corner barely visible from the main room. When I opened the door, I found what looked like a waiting room. The room was sparsely furnished, just a few chairs and a table on which lay a single package wrapped in black tape. No name, no label, nothing. I knew it had to be my package, but something about it made me hesitate. Finally, I reached out and picked it up. The moment I lifted it, I heard a soft click. The door behind me closed by itself. I turned around and tried to open it, but it was locked. In my panic, I began to open the package. Inside, I found something I hadn't expected, an old-fashioned Phonia model that hadn't been manufactured for a long time. And that wasn't all. The phone was wrapped in a bundle of yellowed papers covered in scribbles and strange symbols. It almost looked like some sort of ritual or incantation. Before I could examine the contents further, the phone began to vibrate. It lit up, even though it obviously wasn't charged. A message appeared on the screen. "You are not allowed to leave." I swallowed hard and tried to turn off the phone, but it wouldn't respond. Instead, it started ringing. The static sound coming from the speaker was an unintelligible mumbling, as if a voice were being transmitted through a poorly functioning radio. I put the phone back in the package and tried to open the door again, but it remained locked. At that moment, when I looked back at the phone, it started vibrating again, more violently this time. a new message appeared on the display. The game has only just begun. Panic rose in me. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but no one responded. After a few minutes, I noticed that the lights were flickering and a shadow glided across the walls. It was as if someone or something was moving outside the room. The shadows seemed to grow denser, almost taking the form of people slowly creeping toward me. In a last-ditch effort to free myself, I pulled out my own phone and tried to call emergency services, but there was no signal. I looked at the package and briefly considered destroying it, but something inside me told me that would be a bad idea. Suddenly, the door opened with a soft creak. A figure stood in the doorway, barely visible in the darkness. They didn't say a word. They just gestured with a hand for me to leave. Without a second thought, I ran past them and barely managed to get out of the building before the door slammed shut with a loud bang behind me. I looked back and saw the building standing there in the darkness, like a monument to the unknown. The streets were still empty, and rain continued to pour down on me. When I felt sure I was far enough away, I stopped and took a deep breath. I still held the package in my hand, and I didn't know whether I would ever be able to get rid of it. The next day, I tried to find the warehouse again for answers, but the building had disappeared. In its place was an empty lot overgrown with weeds. No one in the neighborhood could recall ever seeing the building, and the online store's website showed no sign of my order. It was as if the entire experience had never happened. Yet every time I looked at the phone from the package, I had the feeling that this wasn't over. Deep down, I knew that what the message on the phone had said was true. The game has only just begun. I work at a large parcel distribution center in Mexico City. The place is hugely a labyrinth of shelves, conveyor belts, and countless boxes that arrive around the clock and then vanish again. I work the night shift. Initially, the job was straightforward, scanning packages, labeling them, and loading boxes onto the trucks. But after a while, the nights started feeling longer and more oppressive, and then something strange happened. It all started a few months ago. It was a night like any other, and I was assigned to Section 22, a part of the warehouse we rarely enter because it's where returns are stored, mostly broken or defective products, nothing interesting. While I was sorting packages, I noticed a box without a labelno sender or recipient. It was gray and worn out, and somehow felt strange, as if it had been there forever. Out of curiosity, I scanned the barcode, but my handheld scanner only displayed an error message. It was as if the package didn't exist in the system. I assumed it was just a glitch, so I put it aside for someone else to deal with. 2 nights later, I was assigned to Section 32B again, which was already unusual because we normally rotate sections so no one is stuck doing the same thing every night. But my supervisor hardly said a word as he handed me my assignment. When I returned to Section 32B, I saw the gray box still there, exactly where I had left it. It was as if no one had noticed it. I decided to take it to the security station so they could figure out what to do with it. But when I lifted it, it was unexpectedly heavy and made a faint rattling sound that gave me goosebumps. It sounded as if something alive were moving inside, but the box was sealed and showed no signs of damage. When I finally reached the security station, no one was there, which was also unusual. Normally, there's always someone on duty to monitor the warehouse. I set the box on the desk and looked around. On the surveillance monitors, I could see my own silhouette in the empty security room. I noticed the cameras weren't working properly. They flickered and randomly switched channels, as though the system was malfunctioning. I tried to contact my supervisor, but my radio was silent. As I turned back to the box, I noticed it had shifted slightly. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then I heard that faint rattling again, now much closer. It sounded as though something inside was tapping on the walls, almost as if it were trying to get out. My heart beat faster, and I felt certain I wasn't alone. As I slowly backed away, I felt a cold draft on my neck. I turned around, but no one was there. The box remained, but it had definitely moved. I just wanted to get out of that room, so I left the box behind and ran back to my section. Yet no sooner had I arrived by the shelves than I saw the package again, in exactly the same spot where I had first found it. It was impossible. I was certain I'd brought it to the security station. The only explanation was that someone had returned it there. But I saw no one nearby, and the surveillance cameras only showed me alone in Section 32B. I approached cautiously and saw that one side of the box had opened slightly, a tiny gap, but enough to see inside. It was dark in there, but I could make out something that looked like dense, dark fur. Then I realized that something was staring back at me, two tiny red points that looked like eyes. I jerked my hand away, and the rattling began again, this time louder and more frantic, as if something was raging inside the box, trying to get out. Panicking, I ran off without looking back, leaving the box behind. The next day, I told my supervisor about the strange package, but he just laughed and suggested I watch fewer horror movies. But when I later returned to Section 32B, the box was gone. No one could tell me what had happened to it, and the security footage showed nothing unusual. Since then, I often think about those red eyes and that inexplicable rattling. I don't know if what I saw was real or just a product of my imagination. But ever since that night, something has changed. When I walk through the dark corridors of the warehouse at night, I sometimes hear a faint tapping, as if someone or something were knocking against the walls, hiding somewhere in the darkness. And I hope I never again come across a gray, unmarked package. I have been working in the customer service department of a large online retailer for years. It was a typical office job involving many phone calls and even more emails. Our main job was to assist customers with their questions, especially about lost or delayed packages. Everything went along smoothly until I received a particularly unusual message one day. A customer was complaining about a package he had returned, claiming it was apparently not empty. At first, I thought I had misread. Sometimes packages get damaged or an item gets forgotten, but not empty sounded strange. So I called the customer, and what he told me made me very uneasy. He claimed the package had arrived at his place, but when he opened it, there was only emptiness inside. Yet he insisted he had heard something, a faint scratching sound, as if something had been alive in it. I jotted down some notes and promised to investigate. The next day, during my break, I ran into Marie, a colleague who worked in the returns department. I casually asked her if she had ever heard of a package that wasn't empty. To my surprise, her cheerful expression turned serious, and she asked me to come to the break room. There, she told me that a few weeks earlier, she had processed a return with the same strange behavior. It was a small package, Marie said, and when I opened it, there was nothing inside. But I felt some kind of pull, as if something in it was breathing. She smiled, but I could see she was uncomfortable. She tried to shrug it off, but the feeling never left her. Back at my desk, I decided to look deeper into this. I opened the database and typed in the tracking number Marie had given me. What I found made my hair stand on end. Apparently, The package had never even arrived at the warehouse. It simply vanished without a trace. Days went by, and I received several emails from customers reporting that they had received similar packages. Some mentioned weird noises. Others said the package gave off a cold feeling. One customer even claimed that upon opening it, he had glimpsed a kind of shadow that disappeared immediately. All the reports were similar, and they started piling up. But no one except me seemed to take them seriously. The following week, I got a small package delivered to my own desk. It wasn't a normal package. It looked old and yellowed, as though it had passed through many hands. The label had only my name but no address. When I picked it up, it felt heavier than it should have, as if it contained only air but somehow also something that breathed and pulsed. My gut told me to leave it alone, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it carefully, but there was nothing inside, completely empty. Yet as I examined it more closely, I noticed it moved slightly, as though pulsing in my hands. I hastily put it down and closed the lid. My fingers were trembling. A colleague happened to walk in and asked what was wrong, but I couldn't reply. In the following days, I began noticing strange things. Whenever I sat at my desk, there was a weird chill around the package. It felt as if the air around it was freezing, and I started hearing voices very soft, barely above a whisper coming from the package. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they seemed to call out to me. I decided to confide in Marie. She was the only one I thought would understand. We met in a cafe after work, and I told her everything. She looked shocked and said she had experienced similar things herself. She said that years ago, she too had received a package that was empty. She had thrown it away immediately, but the feeling that it wasn't truly empty had never left her. Over the next few days, I couldn't escape the package anymore. It was always there on my desk, on my chair, sometimes even on my nightstand at home. I knew logically it couldn't be there, but my mind kept playing tricks on me. I started having nightmares and waking up drenched in sweat, certain there was something in the room, a shadow that moved and watched me. One night, after a particularly gruesome nightmare, I woke up convinced I wasn't alone. I heard the whispering I knew from the package, louder and clearer than ever before, right next to me. I turned on the light, but no one was there. The package lay on the floor, and I could have sworn I saw a dark shape crawling out of it and quickly spreading across the room. The next day, I called in sick to work and searched the entire house for the package, but it was gone. I tried calling Marie, but she didn't answer. I began to wonder if I was going crazy. I was terrified of every shadow. Every sound, every rustle made me jump. I decided to return to the office and get rid of the package once and for all. When I arrived, I found Marie looking distraught. She told me she'd had horrible nightmares all night and also felt like she was being followed. Together, we went down into the office basement, where old packages and unprocessed returns were stored. There, we found the package I'd received on my desk a few days earlier. We decided to lock it in a cupboard and seal the room. But before we could leave, we heard it again, whispering, dripping, scratching, coming from all directions. We fled the room and locked the door behind us. I don't know if leaving it there helped or if it was only an illusion, but the feeling of being stalked never really went away. Marie quit her job a few days later and vanished. I handed in my resignation a few weeks after that. To this day, I still have nightmares. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and see a shadow on my wall. It looks like a package, or maybe just the ghost of one. I don't know if it's really there or just in my head. But one thing is certain. The emptiness in that package has never really stopped haunting me. It was the middle of the night, and I was just about to order a camera on a website. I had saved up for a long time so I could afford that model, and when I finally added it to my cart and proceeded to check out, I felt excited. Everything seemed to run smoothly until I got a message that my order was delayed and needed a manual review. That was odd, but I didn't think too much about it, so I closed my browser. The next day, I got a notification on my phone. Your order has been shipped. I smiled, relieved, and clicked the tracking link. But instead of the usual tracking page, a map appeared showing a moving marker that led straight to my house. It was as if I could watch the delivery van in real time. Fascinated, I watched the dot get closer and closer until it finally reached my front door. Since the van appeared to be there, I went to the door, but when I opened it, there was no 180 vehicle, no driver, no sign of my order. I frowned and refreshed the tracking page, but the map now showed a different address a few streets away. Maybe the driver had made a mistake, I thought, and I shut the door. A few hours later, I received an email with the subject line, "Your order is on its way." But this was unusual. It didn't look like a normal shipping notification. The text said, "We know you're waiting. The order will arrive soon." It felt threatening, or at least that's how I perceived it. Uneasy, I looked around as though someone were watching me. That night, as I was almost asleep, I heard a faint knocking at my door. I froze. It was the middle of the night, and no one should be there. Cautiously, I cracked the door open and peered outside. To my horror, there was a small package on the doorstep, unaddressed and with no hint as to its origin. It wasn't even taped shut. Reluctantly, I brought the package inside and opened it. Inside was the camera I'd ordered, but something was off. It was heavier than expected, and when I picked it up, it felt cold, so cold, as though it had been stored in a freezer. I turned it on, but instead of the normal startup screen, it showed images of my house, taken from different angles at different times. The last image showed my face as I opened the door. A shiver ran down my spine. I checked the memory card, but it was empty except for a single file titled Traceback. I opened it on my laptop. It showed a video that had apparently been recorded by the camera itself, capturing me as I opened the box and took out the camera right up to the moment I was watching that very video. It seemed to be live recording me. Suddenly, a message appeared on the screen. "We see you." I jumped and pushed the laptop away. I ran to the door and checked the windows, but everything was locked. How was this possible? I assumed it was some sort of surveillance device, but by whom and why? All I knew was that I wasn't alone, and the feeling of being watched was so intense that I felt I was losing my mind. After a sleepless night, I decided to return the camera. But when I tried to enter the return tracking number, I got an error message. "Return not possible." I searched frantically for a customer service contact, but the website I'd ordered from no longer existed overnight. It had vanished. Every trace of my order was gone, as if the camera had never existed. I decided to take the camera to the police, hoping they could help me. But when I arrived at the station and put the camera on the counter, it disappeared. The officer gave me a puzzled look. When I explained everything, he questioned me for filing a false statement. I couldn't prove a thing, as all the evidence had vanished. Desperate, I went back home. Both my laptop and the camera were gone. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. A few days later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was just a single line, "We will keep following you." I was scared to even open it. When I finally did, it turned out to be empty. I turned it every which way, searching for a sign or a note, but there was nothing. Yet I knew I could feel someone was still observing me. Maybe they knew where I was, what I was doing, even what I was thinking. To this day, I still sometimes hear the camera's shutter click, as though it continues recording me somewhere in my house, but I can never find it. Sometimes I think I see it in a mirror or behind a closet door, but when I check, there's nothing. It's as if an invisible eye is always watching. And so I keep living, constantly under observation, never sure who or what is behind this horrifying game. I've been working in a night warehouse for a large shipping company for about a year. Normally, it's just a regular job sorting, scanning, and loading packages. But a few weeks ago, I noticed something strange. Packages started to disappear. Then, out of nowhere, they'd reappear in some other corner of the warehouse, sometimes in a completely different area, as if they'd walked there on their own. At first, I thought it was just a sorting error, but it kept happening more frequently, and the type of packages involved made me uneasy. One night, while on my rounds, I discovered a particularly odd package. It was large, unlabeled, and sealed with strange tape that seemed damp. I knew it didn't belong where I found it. The control station didn't register it, and it simply said, "Unknown." A cold shiver ran down my spine as I touched the package. It felt unnaturally warm, as though it were alive. My curiosity battled with a sense of foreboding, but I decided to open it to ensure there was nothing dangerous inside. As I tore off the tape, a horrible stench hit me, a mixture of mold and something sweet, almost like rotting flesh. Inside were bizarre items: an old doll's dress, crumpled photos of unknown people, and a small rusty chain stained with dark spots. I just wanted to stuff everything back in, when suddenly I heard a noise behind me. Slowly, I turned around, but there was no one there, just the endless rows of shelves fading into the dark. Yet I felt I was being watched. I hastily closed the package and put it back where I found it, then hurried back to my section. In the following nights, I started hearing voices, someone whispering my name. And I kept feeling cold drafts, even though there were no windows nearby. When I told my coworkers, they laughed, but I could tell they too felt uneasy. The warehouse felt colder, darker, like a living being that was watching us. A few days later, the package turned up again, this time in another area. It was like it was following me, drawn to me in particular. Each time I saw it, I had a bad feeling, and I dreaded what might be inside. But the worst happened the next time I opened it. Instead of the previous items, I found only ashes and a single photo of me, in my work clothes, in that warehouse, with a horrified look on my face. It was exactly how I would have looked the first time I opened the package. That's when I realized this package was some sort of mirror of my fears, absorbing all the anxiety and darkness around it and using them against me like a kind of demon that held me captive in an endless labyrinth of shelves and boxes. I left the warehouse that same night and never went back. The memory of that package and the voices haunts me to this day. A few years ago, I got a new job at a manufacturing company in a neighboring city. It was the best offer I'd ever received, so I didn't hesitate to pack my belongings and move. I found a half-furnished apartment near my new workplace. It was modest, but the best I could afford. It had very little furniture, so I pretty much had to buy everything. The most urgent need was to furnish the bedroom, since everything there was in such bad shape that I got rid of it all, leaving the room completely empty. I would be earning more money than before, but I planned to save for a few months before renovating. Before moving, I had already bought a few items for the apartment, but there were still many things I needed. None of them was a bed frame, as I had purchased a new mattress the same day I cleared the bedroom. But all the frames I found were really expensive, and after all my spending on rent and furnishings, I wanted to save as much money as possible. Since new bed frames were too expensive, I began looking in some second-hand furniture stores and on Craigslist, where I saw the most listings for this kind of item. I remember feeling thrilled at first, because the prices were indeed much cheaper, but then I realized most of them were in terrible shape. I was about to give up when I found exactly what I was looking for. It was indeed an old wooden bed frame, but at least it was in decent condition. I immediately emailed to ask if it was still available. A minute later, I got a response confirming it was still for sale for only $35. I was delighted. This was the perfect find for me, so I accepted without hesitation, and we agreed on a meeting time that same day. Later that day, while moving things around in the bedroom to make room for the bed frame, I got an email from the seller with his address. It was already 3:30 in the afternoon, and the place was about 20 minutes away in a part of town I'd never been to, but since I had just moved here, that wasn't unusual. I took some cash, jumped in my car, and headed to meet the seller, not knowing I was about to experience one of the most frightening and disturbing encounters of my life. As I drove, I kept looking around to get a sense of the area. Halfway there, I left the city behind and entered a more rural zone with only a few houses scattered around. That wasn't what I expected, but as I reached the address, I saw that the homes weren't far apart from each other and most of them looked pretty normal, if a bit shabby. I parked at the address, noticing the house's lights were on and the front door was ajar. I got out and went to the door but didn't go inside. I just rang the bell. A man appeared soon after, tall and hefty, balding, wearing a jacket. When he invited me inside, he didn't seem strange or dangerous, though something about his overly familiar manner made me uneasy. Perhaps it was the way he spoke to me as if we were old friends. I tried to ignore it, followed him upstairs, and we turned into a small room. Once inside, I immediately felt confused because the room looked lived in, with a dresser, nightstands, even clothes lying around. Strangest of all, the bed frame had a mattress on it with sheets and blankets. I turned to him and clarified that I only wanted the bed frame, not the mattress or anything else. He gave me an odd smile and said, "Of course." Even though this situation was weird, I tried not to overthink it. I focused on examining the bed frame and saw that it was in good condition. I told him I'd take it. He smiled even more broadly and offered to help carry it to my truck. Suddenly, out of nowhere, he asked, "Would you like a drink before you go?" I hadn't even answered when he walked away down the hallway, returning surprisingly fast with 2 glasses of beer in hand, as if he'd had them ready in the next room. He hurriedly handed one to me, but I politely declined. He seemed confused and immediately made a strange suggestion, implying that we could pretend to be together, since we were, after all, alone in a room. That threw me for a loop. I couldn't believe he'd said something like that. I tried to remain calm, telling him nicely that I was only interested in buying the bed frame and leaving. My refusal seemed to enrage him. In an instant, his mischievous grin turned into anger, and he suddenly turned aggressive. He grabbed my arm, yanked me roughly against his chest, and said, "Why are you being so difficult? I know you like me." "You want this too?" I was shocked. This man was completely insane, and I was alone with him. I tried to stay calm and talk my way out of it, my voice trembling, saying I wasn't comfortable with how he was treating me. Surprisingly, that worked. He loosened his grip, smiled again, and spoke in a soft voice. You're right. Sometimes you make it hard, and that annoys me. Why do you do that if you know how I react? I was stunned. This guy was truly unhinged. As though a light went on in his head, he suddenly said, "Oh, right. How could I forget? You prefer wine. Just wait here a moment. I'll get you a glass." He then let go of my arm and left, presumably to get wine. As you can imagine, I sprinted down the stairs as soon as he left the room. He shouted after me to stop and even started to chase me. At one point, I thought he'd catch me, but he tripped on the stairs, possibly spraining his ankle, and couldn't stand up. I seized the chance to jump into my car and speed off. When I got home, I could barely believe how bizarre and terrifying the whole encounter had been. I checked the ad again, but it was no longer saved, which made me think he'd done this many times before. But why place an ad for an old bed frame? I'll probably never know. I'm just glad I escaped unscathed. My name is Laura, and I live in Missouri in the United States. The incident I'm about to share happened only a few months ago, and I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. I'm 33 years old, a single mother of an 8-year-old boy named Michael. About 2 months ago, Michael's 8th birthday was coming up, and after several months of saving, I had just enough money to buy him what he wanted most, a PS5 Slim. A few weeks before Michael's birthday, I went on Amazon and purchased a PS5 bundle that included FIFA 20, The Last of Us, God of War, and Madden, one of his favorite games. 15 days later, precisely on Michael's birthday, the order was set for delivery, as I'd planned, so it would be a surprise. That day, I got up early to wake him with a little cake, and of course, birthday songs. He was really happy, ate all his cake, but wasn't expecting anything else. Then, around 10 in the morning, I looked out the window and saw an Amazon delivery van pull up in front of the house. When the bell rang, I asked Michael to open the door, eager to watch his reaction upon receiving his dream gift. I wanted the moment to be special, brimming with laughter. It was supposed to be perfect, but I'd soon regret letting him answer the door. Michael went to receive the package from the Amazon worker, just as expected. But instead of handing him the PS5, the delivery man just stood there, holding the box, wearing a twisted grin, staring at my little boy in a profoundly disturbing way. Immediately, I felt a rush of unease. Something dark gleamed in his stare. Michael looked at me, confused and frightened. I waited a few seconds for the man to simply hand over the box and leave, but he continued staring at Michael. So I stepped in. I marched to the door, took the package from him, and signed the form. I glared at him as I handed it back, but he still didn't look at me. He continued staring at my son with that same disturbing expression. Michael, clearly scared, darted behind me. Seeing that, I slammed the door in his face. He nearly got hit by the door, but I didn't care. Furious, I turned to Michael to lead him to the couch so he could open his present. I heard the man say, "Thank you," through the door. Then I heard the van start up and leave. My anger was intense. I wanted this moment to be perfect for Michael, but that man's dreadful behavior had cast a shadow over it. Fortunately, children can be resilient, and I distracted him by joking about the box and asking him to guess its contents. As soon as he realized it was a new PlayStation, Michael was ecstatic and dashed off to his room to try it. The following Monday, I picked Michael up from school. Like always, I asked how his day had gone while we drove. He gave me the usual answers about lessons and playing with friends. Then, under all that chatter, he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Michael said that during recess, a man behind the school fence had called him over from some bushes in the back of the schoolyard. Alarmed, I asked if Michael had gone to him. He said yes, the man had called him friend and offered cookies and candies, acting very nice. My stomach dropped. Then Michael told me something that really terrified me. The man asked where his parents were and what he liked to play. Finally, he asked if Michael wanted to come to his house after school so he could have more candy. At that point, I nearly lost it, but I tried to stay calm and not scream at my son. I explained that the man was not his friend, that he was luring kids to harm them. I also reminded him of the never talk to strangers rule, something kids hear all over the world for centuries but sometimes forget in exchange for sweets. My horror deepened when Michael told me he'd seen the man just the day before, standing outside our house on the opposite side of the street. The man waved at him to come out. I almost fainted. I had to breathe deeply to keep from panicking. Right away, I called the school and warned the principal about the man loitering on the premises. Then I informed the police. I gave them a physical description and mentioned how he was the same Amazon delivery guy, demanding that they identify him so he could be arrested. I threatened to sue and demanded they take responsibility if anything happened to my son. In the following weeks, I kept Michael home from school. I was so paranoid and worried that I refused to let him out of my sight. But the real terror was just beginning. About 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday night, I woke up around midnight. I often did that lately. I went to check on Michael, who was asleep, and headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. Then I heard someone messing with the handle of our back door. Panicked, I rushed to look. My heart nearly stopped when I saw a dark figure standing there, trying to get in. I screamed and hurried to grab a large kitchen knife to defend myself in case he broke in. Meanwhile, I called the police, but just then, I heard footsteps moving away. When I ran back to the door, the figure was gone. Moments later, I heard a car starting up and speeding off on the other side of the street. Naturally, I couldn't sleep that night, nor the following nights. This all happened only 2 months ago, and we still haven't heard anything definitive from the authority. There have been no further incidents, but I can't shake the feeling that our nightmare isn't over yet. I've always been a big fan of reality shows Big Brother, The Bachelor, and of course, the unavoidable Keeping Up with the Kardashians. After all, who wouldn't want to be them, right? Well, anyway, like every drama-hungry reality TV fan, I began following my favorite stars on social media, especially Instagram. But I never imagined that something as simple and harmless as that would lead me straight into a real-life nightmare that proved these reality stars aren't always harmless idols. One thing these reality show celebrities have in common is that they post spectacular photos of themselves all day long. But it's not just vanity, they actually make a lot of money doing it. Most of them are sponsored by brands whose products they promote on their social media channels. It's widely known that these stars aren't famous for their talent, but for their image. Almost everything they promote is about looks. They make us believe that such and such product is their secret for looking great, even if they don't really use it themselves. But when your idol, someone you'd love to look like, tells you to buy a certain product in order to achieve their results, you're inclined to do it even though it might be just an ad. Sometimes, though, falling for that marketing can have scary consequences, like in my case, where trying to look like my favorite star turned into the scariest ordeal of my life. It all happened in 2015. It started with an Instagram post by my favorite reality star. She shared a selfie in a bikini while drinking a tea that supposedly would make you lose 30 pounds in 2 weeks, an Asian tea that apparently worked miracles. The post's caption went something like, "Do you like how I look? If you want to know my secret, I'm holding it right here in my hands." And in her hands was that tea. What really caught my eye was that just a few weeks prior, pictures of her had been leaked online, showing her on the street looking quite overweight. Yet in this new post, less than a month later, she looked amazing slim and in perfect shape. Obviously, we all know celebrities sometimes use Photoshop to make themselves appear slimmer, so I checked the picture for the usual red flags like warped walls, bent door frames, or blurry edges, but found nothing. It looked real. She had definitely lost a lot of weight. Honestly, I hadn't planned on trying it, but just a few weeks later, my best friend's wedding was coming up, and I was the maid of honor. I wasn't in my best shape and felt pretty down about it. So that miracle tea seemed to come at exactly the right time for me. After reading the post, I noticed she had left a promo code in her caption for a 25% discount. What else could I ask for? That same night, I ordered the so-called Asian tea online and waited for it to arrive. The shipping was insanely quick. After just 1.5 days, a simple brown box showed up. Inside was a pouch of dried leaves that smelled slightly earthy, with a pretty little design of leaves, a female silhouette, and the product name in pink letters. It actually looked quite professional. I checked the ingredients list and saw lots of usual Thingstea leaves, a bit of ginger root, aloe and something called Tania saginata, which I'd never heard of. I just assumed it was some exotic Asian plant or herb. The instructions were simple. Steep the tea at 85 Dufour-C, 185 Dufour-F, and drink it without a tea bag to enjoy its full effect. I figured swallowing a few tea leaves by accident wouldn't hurt, so I brewed it that very day. The taste was super bitter, almost nauseating. Still, I drank 2 cups daily for a week, and I did notice my stomach flattening somewhat. Honestly, I wasn't expecting a miracle. I'd tried other weight loss products before, and they never worked. But when I stepped on the scale at the end of the first week, I couldn't believe my eyes. I had lost 7 pounds. 7 pounds in 1 week, me best result ever with a diet product. And it didn't stop there. People started complimenting me on how good I looked, how fit and slim I appeared. What nobody knew, not even me, was that something terrible was growing inside. By the second week, I'd continued with 2 cups a day, but then decided to increase it to 3 cups. Thinking if 2 cups resulted in losing about a pound a day, maybe 3 cups would yield even faster weight loss. I was so focused on shedding pounds quickly for the wedding that logic and caution went out the window. By the end of that second week, I'd lost a total of 21 pounds, meaning I dropped an average of 1.5 pounds a day. It was insane. My clothes were getting baggy, and I was on cloud 9. But I also didn't want to become too thin, so in the third week, I cut back to 1 cup a day to lose just 15 more pounds. Yet at the end of that third week on 1 cup a day, I'd lost another 18 pounds. At that point, I still wasn't worried. Actually, I was thrilled. But then I kept losing weight even after I quit the tea entirely. Over the next week, I lost 7 more pounds and 5 more in the following one. I began panicking about how skinny I'd become, and what scared me the most was how weak I felt. I couldn't understand why I was losing weight when I wasn't even drinking the tea anymore. I tried eating more calorie-dense meals, but the weight kept dropping off. Worst of all, new symptoms appeared: horrible stomach aches, dizziness, and a constant feeling of hunger. The wedding day arrived, and it was time to put on the gorgeous bridesmaid dress my friend had sent me. When I tried it on, I was devastated. The dress practically hung off my skeletal frame. The seamstress was called in for emergency alterations. Under the delicate fabric, my ribs protruded, and it took a lot of makeup to hide how hollow my cheeks were. When my boyfriend came to pick me up before the ceremony, his face showed pure shock at my drastic thinness. But that was the least of my concerns. I felt worse every day. The scariest part was I couldn't get rid of that gnawing hunger. I constantly craved more food. So during the wedding, I snuck extra snacks I'd hidden in my purse and then ate a huge dinner. The kitchen staff had to bring me 2 more courses just for me. I couldn't stop. Everyone at the wedding stared at me, certain I must have bulimia. They thought I was binge eating and then purging, but I wasn't. Nothing seemed to satiate me. I was ravenous. I felt weaker by the minute, but I tried to hide it and enjoy the celebration anyway. I usually love dancing, so I stood up when the music started, wanting to be myself again. But as soon as I started to move, the room spun. My head felt like it would explode, and my vision tunneled. The last thing I remember is falling backward, arms outstretched, staring at the disco ball on the ceiling as it shrank to a dotand, then everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital, hooked up to multiple IV lines and a feeding tube inserted through my nose, delivering the nutrition my body so desperately needed. I didn't even have to mention the tea to the doctor, because I was already the 4th case in 2 months he had seen and one of only 2 patients still alive with this exact condition. As soon as he realized I was awake, he asked, "Have you been drinking that Asian tea?" I confessed yes, and he shook his head, telling me the scariest news of my life. Taenia saginata is the scientific name for the beef tapeworm, a potentially deadly parasite that feeds on all the nutrients in your body, leading to severe malnutrition. It can also bore through your intestines and internal organs. Several tapeworms were discovered inside my body by that time. The doctor said he had already removed 15 of them from my intestines. He told me I was lucky they hadn't migrated to other parts of my body, a misfortune that had befallen 2 of the 3 other women he'd treated before me. But I wasn't entirely out of danger. Once this parasite is inside you, it's extremely difficult to eradicate completely. I now need regular medical checkups for the rest of my life, along with a special high-calorie diet plan. Even so, I may never really be free of the threat those worms pose. My name is Anna, and when I was 22, I decided to move out of my parents' house and live independently. That was back in 2012. I was at that stage where you want your own space, to finally feel like an adult. But it wasn't easy financially, as I had only just enough savings for decent rent, and there were many other expenses I had to cover. So I decided to sell some of my belongings to make ends meet. At that time, Craigslist was basically the only platform I knew of for posting and selling used items. I had never heard any horror stories about it, and I'd had positive experiences buying things there. So I trusted it without hesitation when I decided to post my items. One of these was my old PC, and that listing got the first response. I received an email from someone named Megan, offering to pay the full asking price. I responded with my address, assured her she could test the PC once she arrived, and we agreed to finalize the deal the next morning. She confirmed and said she'd email me when she was on her way. That day, I was off work, so I got up early to tidy up the house while waiting for Megan to arrive at 11 a.m. I kept checking my email for her message that she was coming, but nothing arrived. By 11:15, still no sign of her. I figured she might be delayed, so I opened the blinds and turned on the TV, keeping an eye on the street for any sign of her. Eventually, around 11:45, a car drove slowly down the street and parked across from my house. The engine stayed on, but nobody got out. I assumed it could be Megan, so I paused the TV, watching for any signal. Minutes went by, but the car didn't move, nor did anyone step out. Suddenly, it pulled away, and disappeared down the road. I got up, went to the window, and glanced outside, feeling baffled. I had no idea what just happened. Was that Megan or someone else with a random reason for stopping there? I shut the blinds, emailed Megan asking if she was still coming, but got no response. After another hour, I got tired of waiting and moved on with my day. I ate lunch, took an afternoon nap, and by the time I woke up, it was late afternoon. I watched TV into the evening, had dinner, and went to bed early around 9 p.m., since I had to work the next day. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up sometime around 11 p.m. for no apparent reason. I lay there, listening, trying to fall back asleep. Then I heard a faint tapping noise that forced me to open my eyes again. I stayed still, waiting to see if the sound would come again. Moments later, I heard a dull knock, coming from somewhere on the ground floor. Feeling uneasy, I left my bed and crept into the hallway, heading downstairs to see if there was some problem with the house. The noise grew louder and closer, like someone banging on a door. But I couldn't tell which door it was. All I knew was that it was definitely coming from downstairs. I walked through the kitchen toward the back hallway, trying to adjust my eyes to the dark. Then another loud thud echoed, ripping through the silence. It came from the back door off the kitchen. Quietly, I approached. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out a person's silhouette outside. From the shape, it looked like a tall, solid man. My heart felt like it had stopped beating for a moment. Then came another furious knock, making the door rattle. I stood frozen. Suddenly, I realized there were two figures out there, not just one. The figure at the door paused and turned toward the window. The one at the window pressed his face to the glass, as if trying to see inside. In that moment, our eyes met, and I felt such intense panic that I began screaming, hoping the neighbors would hear. For what felt like ages but was likely only a couple of seconds, we stared at each other through the glass. Then the silhouettes darted back, disappearing into my yard. Terrified, I ran to call the police. Of course, by the time they arrived, the intruders were gone. The worst part was seeing that the outside latch had fresh scratches, like someone had tried to pry it open. Although it seemed likely these people were connected to the Craigslist reply from Megan, there was no evidence to prove it. But I'm sure that was no coincidence. I never discovered who those people were or what they wanted. I became paranoid for a long time, always afraid they would return. I replaced every lock in the house, installed security cameras around the property, and even bought a weapon. Most importantly, I never used that classified site again. My name is Christina. I'm 30 years old, and what I'm about to share happened just 2 years ago. Back then, I was looking for temporary housing in a different city. Without going into detail, I lived far from my family, but a close family member was going through a serious situation, and I needed to stay in their area for a few months. Living with my family wasn't an option, so I began seeking alternatives. A hotel would have been too expensive for a long-term stay, so renting a house or apartment near them seemed best, but it was difficult. Nobody wanted to rent for just a few months. Most landlords insisted on at least 6 months. Days went by, and I was running out of options, getting desperate. Finally, after about a week of searching, I found an ad on Facebook Marketplace that looked perfect for my short-term needs. I contacted the person, an older-sounding lady who spoke slowly. She was incredibly friendly on the phone, offering a 4-month lease, exactly what I wanted. The house was small but close to where I needed to be, and the price was very reasonable. I felt relief wash over me. I'd nearly given up hope of finding a place. I hurried to wrap up my own apartment, get everything in order for my extended stay away, and a few weeks later, I arrived at the rental. Sure enough, it was near my family, but also quite far from the main road, somewhat hidden in the woods. The landlady didn't meet me there. Instead, she left some paperwork and a key at the door. So I went in. It had all the basics, everything looked in good shape, and it was clean though it felt smaller than in the photos. Still, I was satisfied. I unpacked a few things, exhausted from the trip, and just wanted to watch TV. Around 7 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. That seemed odd, because I had no reason to expect anyone. Checking my phone, I had no message from the landlady or anyone else. I went to the door and peered through the peephole. A man stood a few feet back from the porch. I hesitated, but eventually opened the door a crack. "Hello? Can I help you?" I asked. He wore a serious expression and said he was there to clean the chimney. I glanced over at the truck in the driveway behind my car and then back at him. "Isn't it a bit late for that?" I said. It was almost 7:30 p.m., a strange time for chimney sweeping. He just shrugged and insisted this was the scheduled time and day for the service. I told him to wait a minute, shut the door, and tried calling the landlady. She didn't pick up. I looked at the chimney and noticed it wasn't even dirty. Unsure what else to do, I figured maybe she had arranged a last-minute service. The guy hadn't said he was a plumber or general handyman, he specifically said chimney, which is so oddly specific that I doubted he was lying. So I opened the door again. But the moment I did, I nearly jumped out of my skin. He was now standing right at the threshold, just inches away, seemingly looming over me. I flinched, not expecting him to be so close. He gave me an impatient, almost angry look, stating he had to finish on time and needed to start immediately. He edged closer, one hand on the door, pushing it gently inward. An uneasy fear gripped me. This felt like an invasion. I looked around, but there was no one else in sight, no neighbor or witness. I tried to remain polite. "Sure, give me just a second, and I'll let you in." I attempted to close the door, but he kept his hand on it so I couldn't shut it. That was a major red flag. He was bigger and stronger than me, and I realized if he pushed, he could force his way in. I had little choice but to let him in. He was tall and bulky, carrying a large bag that could hold anything, tools or something much worse. My mind was racing. I was alone in the middle of the woods with this stranger who had no intention of leaving, so I led him toward the chimney while he followed right behind me, breathing down my neck. We reached the fireplace, and I said casually, "Look in there. See that?" I pointed at something I pretended to notice. As soon as he leaned in, I snatched my car keys and house key from the table, and sprinted. I managed to get out the door and lock it behind me just in time. I heard him pounding on the door and cursing at me, but I didn't wait. I started my car, reversed out, sideswiping his truck in the process, and sped into the night. I didn't stop until I reached a small supermarket where I asked security guards to call the police. They loaned me a phone, and I explained everything. By the time the police arrived at the house, the man and his truck were gone. The front door had been smashed open, police suspected with an axe, given the marks in the wood. Imagining he'd had an axe with him all along terrified me. Who needs an axe to clean a chimney? Clearly his intentions were malevolent. He was never found. The police surmised that he'd found out the owner rented out the house and deliberately chose a day when a new tenant unaware of any scheduling would likely let a supposed chimney sweep in. I ended the lease immediately, and the landlady returned my money. I never set foot in that house again. I'm going to tell you about a nightmare I experienced 5 years ago. It all began with my plan to buy a silly birthday gift for one of my friends, Adrian, or Adri, as I call him. He's always been the prankster of the group, delighting in giving me outrageous gifts on my birthdays, and it became a tradition between us. Each of us tried to top the other by showing up on their birthday with something ridiculous. This time, I'd already used up most of my creative ideas and was struggling to think of a new prank gift. While browsing online, I stumbled upon an ad that caught my attention. A sex doll. That would definitely be hilarious for someone like Adrian. I immediately started searching for offers, but these things were expensive. I was about to give up when I found a place selling a doll called Bad Alice at a very low price. From the picture, it was a pretty, very realistic doll, but they only had one model left, a blonde in a schoolgirl outfit. Another detail that struck me was that she had one blue eye and one brown eye heterochromia. I'd never seen a doll or any toy with different colored eyes before. I found that quirky and amusing, especially since the price was just $100. I figured it was some defective factory reject or a budget model, but I didn't care because it was only for a gag gift, so I bought it on the spot. I still had 20 days until Adrian's birthday, so I had plenty of time for shipping. However, the next morning, I woke up as usual to get ready for work, sipping my coffee when someone knocked on my door. Surprised, I opened it to find a huge box, clearly the doll, delivered incredibly fast. Thrilled, I couldn't resist taking a peek right away, even though I had only 15 minutes before I had to leave for the office. I tore open the box, tossed aside the packing paper, and pulled out the doll. I must say, I was genuinely impressed. She was stunningly realistic. Her skin felt almost human-like. I read in the product description that she was made of a special silicone that mimicked real human skin texture. However, contrary to the online pictures showing a blonde, this Bad Alice had red hair. And yes, she did indeed have one brown eye and one blue eye. An odd, intriguing detail was that her eyelids looked so lifelike. They were closed at first, so I carefully opened them and found those mismatched eyes staring back at me. It was almost as if she were looking straight into my soul. I was delighted with my purchase, convinced it would be a perfect prank for Adrian. All I had to do was hide it until the big day. So I put the doll back in its box, carried it to my closet, stood it up inside, and shut the door. Then I left for work. That evening, I came home, went straight to my bedroom to change, take a shower, and relax. But as soon as I opened the door, my blood ran cold. Someone was lying on my bed. I screamed and jumped back in terror. Then I realized it was the doll, Bad Alice. Confusion gripped me. I was certain I had left her in the closet before going to work. If she was now on my bed, did that mean someone had broken into my apartment? My nerves were on edge. I inspected the lock-no sign of forced entry. I checked all my rooms and drawers. Nothing was missing or disturbed, except for the doll that was inexplicably on my bed. I immediately called the building management to report a possible break-in, hoping the security cameras in the hallway might show who had entered my apartment. The staff reviewed the tapes and confirmed that nobody at all had come into my unit. Perplexed, I tried to convince myself that I must have been so distracted in the morning rush that I never actually put her in the closet, perhaps leaving her on the bed instead. Yet I had a crystal-clear memory of hiding her in the closet. Still, I shrugged it off, thinking it must have been a slip of my memory. So I took the doll and stored her carefully in the closet a second time, making sure I closed the door. That, however, was only the beginning of what would become the most unsettling experience of my life.